this moment.
Exactly. Um, well, thank you so much for talking with me, and I really enjoyed. I don't know if you call it a presentation or what you would call it, but the way that I was first introduced to you, probably about 2 months ago now,
Yes.
um, and I was really intrigued with just your curiosity and and also just all of the. It seemed to me like you don't separate disciplines, like, or you don't and it seems like you're willing to create in whatever discipline. Would you say that's true, or is it
Yes, I've come to see reality as one seamless, pulsing, breathing experience.
uh-huh.
In that seamlessness, I find it difficult to categorize anything. And I've spent the last 15 years studying with non-dual teachers and training as a non-dual teacher. Even though I don't call myself a non-dual teacher, I don't even call myself a teacher. However, I've been immersed in non-dual traditions, and basically I'm an earth steward. So my greatest teacher is the earth. And when we talk about a seamlessness, there she is. Everything is there.
Hmm. Where are you right now?
I'm at my sanctuary. I live on the big island of Hawaii. I've spent the past 30 years building two eco sanctuaries here. I call them Dharma Gaia centers because I'm bringing together the Dharma, the living Dharma, and also indigenous teachings. Those are my two main passions:
Hmm.
earth-based spirituality and Buddhism.
Yeah. What is that beautiful room or space that you're in right now?
This is a room that my son helped me build. Um, at this sanctuary, we have over 20 structures. Many years ago, my teacher, Faisal Makadam, said to me one day, Rashani, let your mind become quiet enough so that you can listen to guidance. So when I got quiet, Clifford, all I heard was create beauty, plant food, and build beautiful living structures where people can come and rejoice on the land. And
Mm.
so I'm an architect and a builder. So I started building these beautiful, simple structures. And my son came, I think it was in 2009, and he said, Shani, don't you think you have enough buildings? And I said, I'm still listening to guidance. And guidance keeps telling me. And then I heard one day someone said that eco sanctuaries are lifeboats for the future. And that struck me as so profound.
Mm.
And many people said, what you're creating is so beautiful and so needed and so unique that one day you'll just be overwhelmed. And I'm at that point now where people are just constantly coming and hungry for refuge, just
Hmm.
to be in such a place. I've been off grid for 30 years. But to answer your question, this is one of the many structures. As you can see, there's bamboo on the walls, and I've used cedar and redwood and just very simple. And then the post you see is ohia wood. This is a hard Hawaiian wood, local
Hmm.
wood.
Oh,
So
this is really, really pretty.
I love building.
And so is this space partially outdoors, or is it outdoors?
Well, it's everything is sort of indoor and outdoor. I have a screen door here. That's why you can. Are you hearing the wind chimes?
Hmm.
Yeah. So I spend most of my time outdoors, and then occasionally I come inside. And for the last 3 weeks, I've had no electricity. I'm experimenting with. I'm very, very allergic to frequencies. So it's ironic because I spend hundreds of hours at a laptop every time I create a book.
Hmm.
But after creating Go Slowly, Breathe, and Smile, I was in recovery for 2 or 3 months. I had to get away from the screen.
Hmm.
Um,
So you feel like it's just it's necessary to be obviously to create in that way. You need that tool, and but then you need a break from it.
well, in the early days, everything I did, all of my collages were hand cut and torn paper and hand lettered. I created my own font. So for years, I did it all by hand, and I didn't realize, but I was poisoning myself with rubber cement glue.
Mm.
And then after breaking my thumb, I couldn't hold a pen any longer. So someone said, "Oh, why don't you just use fonts and use a computer?" And I was so shocked. The thought of creating art on a computer seemed terrible, but I did. And so now I've mastered Photoshop, which I'm amazed. I'm not very computer savvy, but somehow I figured out Photoshop and it has become quite exciting. And then my technique has changed over the years pretty much by accident. I just keep pushing things and these accidental um, layers appear and textures appear. So for me, it's sort of wu wei on the computer, an effortless action with a computer instead of doing it by hand.
Hmm. Just a different tool. Um,
Yeah,
so where were you born?
I was born in California,
Uh huh. In what part of California?
Stanford. My
Okay.
father was a professor at Stanford University.
Uh huh. So that's just it's basically very close to the Bay Area, but not quite in the Bay Area, or
Oh,
is that?
it is in the Bay Area.
It is the Bay Area. Yeah.
Yeah.
So um, I was just talking yesterday with Lee Oscar, who's a harmonica player. He was in a band called War, um, and they did this that song Lowrider, and he was talking about being in San Francisco in the late '60s, and just that's a time that many of us have heard about, who weren't alive then. Um, and I'm just wondering, were you there during that time period as well?
I actually left California in 1968
Okay,
and
so
moved to
you
the East Coast and experienced 2 years on the East Coast and then moved to Europe when my brother was chosen as number two in the draft lottery. My whole family left the United States.
uh-huh to avoid the draft.
Yes. But I
Yeah.
was, in the early 60s, that's when I was using my artwork for the civil rights movement. I was so inspired by Sister Corita Kent. Do you remember her?
I
She was
I,
a
I don't know her.
she was a revolutionary Catholic nun
Uh-huh.
who who used her art to wake people up. She was really remarkable.
Mm-hmm.
So at the age of 12, I began using my artwork to raise money for the civil rights movement. It's very exciting.
And then so you were inspired. I mean, that's a lot of 12-year-olds probably weren't thinking about that sort of thing. How were you aware? I mean,
My
and
mother came to school one day and she said to the principal, "I'm taking my daughter and my son out of school today. They're going to meet a great man." And she took us to East Palo Alto, where we met and marched with Martin Luther King Jr.
uh-huh.
And I think I was 10 or 11, I don't remember. And Joan Baez was there, and I was absolutely enraptured. And I knew that I really, I said quietly to myself, if they can make social change through love and through music, I can do the same. And Joan was my hero, my heroine,
Mm-hmm.
hero for many years. And of course, Martin Luther King left an indelible imprint on my life.
Mm-hmm. So it was an experience that really, it sounds like it opened up a new world for you.
Absolutely.
Uh-huh. And when I was reading your bio, you it sounds like you've had so many teachers and mentors, and I know some of which probably wouldn't have even considered themselves to be teachers or mentors. Um, but how have you found yourself kind of finding different teachers?
I've never been searching.
Uh-huh.
it's so it's so ironic. Um, I was somewhat of a subversive activist in high school, and I had a huge portfolio. I was already teaching art at the age of 17. I had 20 students. I had a prolific portfolio, and I was offered scholarships at so many universities and colleges, not only because I was a straight A student, but because of my portfolio and because of my activism. I was
Mm-hmm.
just very out there, and I wasn't interested. I wasn't at all interested. My father kept saying, "Oh, but you could go to Stanford," and I said, "Dad, I know that would, make you happy, but I have no desire. I'm not an academic.
Mm-hmm.
That's not my way."
Yeah.
So I, I think, meeting Martin Luther King and Joan Baez, and then Alan Watts was a very good friend of my parents. We used to go sailing
Mm-hmm.
uh, on Sundays with Janko Varda and his amazing sort of bohemian friends. Back in the day, it was in Sausalito. He lived on a ferry boat, and then we would go sailing. And Alan Watts was one of the many amazing people. And I remember I invited Alan to come and speak to my sixth grade class one day, and I have no idea if any of the parents knew what he was talking about
So he
at
came and
all.
spoke to your sixth grade class.
And to the parents, it was in an evening event. He
Uh-huh.
came to dinner, and then he went and spoke to and that's just sort of the milieu I grew up in. And my father was a professor of philosophy of art, and my mother was an extraordinary poet and mystic. So it was very natural and sort of this normal environment, growing up with writers and poets and composers, um, and that's where I always felt at home. And I've never had a 9 to 5 job.
Mm-hmm.
um, I'll share this because this is kind of beautiful. I met Alice O'Howell. She was a Jungian
Can you say it
astrologer.
again? It was breaking up a little bit.
Oh, I met a woman named Alice O'Howell. She was a Jungian astrologer. I met her at a transpersonal psychology conference many years ago. I was in my 20s. And she looked at my chart and she said, "Oh, this is so fascinating. I don't think I've ever seen this before. You will only ever have one vocation in your entire life." And I said, "Really?" And I said, "What will that be?" And she said, "Bartering magic for magic. That's all you will ever do." And that's really what my life has been. I've bartered so often. When my son was little, I never took him to a doctor, but I took him to acupuncturists and naturopaths, and I bartered. I paid with my artwork.
Mm-hmm.
So that's been my currency. And when people come here and they want to do retreats with me and they say, "Well, I don't have enough money," I say, "Well, what's your currency?"
Hmm.
And they'll say,
What
"Oh,
are some different currencies you have found?
a filmmaker." If you go to my website, you see these beautiful films. That was a
Uh,
woman who came for a 2 week intensive, and she said, "I want to do the intensive. I could pay you half in cash." And I said, "Great. And what's your other currency?" And she said, "I'm a filmmaker." So
mm-hmm.
she made these beautiful films.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
others become are gardeners, others are painters, others are carpenters. I mean, even at this moment as we speak, I have several people here trading to be here. It's so beautiful, so
Yeah.
beautiful.
So you just grew up in this art culture of arts and both visual, musical, I mean, and with literature as well, and writing, and what so did you always kind of just do what you were feeling as far as what art you were doing,
Well,
or how did that
as
develop?
I mentioned, as a young child, I was given the choice to wash dishes or write poetry.
Mm,
So I was a prolific poet by the time I was 10. I had actually written 2 books by the time I was 10 or 11, and they were have since been published.
And later on, you learned to love washing dishes. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, I lived at the Llama Foundation in New Mexico, and there were 40 or 50 people there, and I loved washing dishes. And my mother's friend said, "Oh, you shouldn't give your children a choice like this. You're going to raise social misfits."
Hmm.
And my mother said, "We'll see."
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I am a social
Uh,
misfit. But I love washing dishes. I love writing poetry. And to answer your question, my uncle has been recognized as one of the greatest American writers of the 20th century. And so he was very much in my childhood. And
what's his name?
Moritz Thompson,
Uh-huh.
Thompson. And but I think, Clifford, the huge turning point was the death of my brother. I was 12 years old.
How old was your brother?
He was 19, and he was a virtuoso guitarist. His dream of dreams was to go to Spain and study with Sabicas and Segovia.
Mm.
And he got to Spain and he was asphyxiated in a small room. And so that death just absolutely catapulted my family into a whole other reality
Mm-hmm.
where everything that we had thought was stable and was just gone. It was just instantly.
Mm-hmm.
So after his death, my father took a sabbatical, and we spent a year driving through Europe. He was writing a book on European architecture, and we
Did you
spent
have
our
other
first.
siblings or just one brother?
I have one living brother who's a Zen Roshi,
Oh, okay.
a pretty remarkable teacher. So we began our journey at Stonehenge on summer solstice. This was
Mm.
1964.
Mm-hmm.
And then we drove through Europe and went to every megalithic site, every Neolithic site, every prehistoric cave, every museum. It was just this phenomenal year of both grieving and celebrating life
Mm-hmm.
and the history of European culture. Um, and then, of course, years later, I became a grief whisperer. I studied with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross and have spent many years just holding space for those who are grieving.
Mm-hmm. So you were able to take your experience, and then that could be a part of your ability to help others, it sounds like.
Yes, yes, just moving through that, the labyrinth of grief. I feel like I watched my parents being eaten alive
Mm-hmm.
by the death of their firstborn son. It
Yeah.
was this huge, well, there are no words for it really.
Yeah.
Um, so somehow I wanted to be there for other people, and I am, and I have been, and will continue to be.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I a friend of mine who I grew up with, she used to be, her name is Lindsay, used to be Hughes was her maiden name, and I believe it's now Lindsay McKinnon. She lost her two young sons in a fire, and
Mm.
I actually would like to connect you two if that's okay with you. But it's been amazing how she's taken that to take on the mission of helping other people.
Yeah. Yeah, there's an alchemy that occurs. It's hard to describe, but I think I wrote about it in the book, Go Slowly, Breathe and Smile, because I really discovered deathlessness while I was with Thich Nhat Hanh.
And,
We
and what
spoke
is
about,
what does that mean? Deathlessness.
well, that there is no death. There's no birth and no death.
Could you
You know,
please expand on that idea?
he says our truest nature is no birth, no death, because
Uh,
these are really just concoctions. These are concepts. These are constructs. The birth and then death, but really neither of them exist. Beauty is that the mind cannot ever wrap itself around birth, death, and deathlessness.
mhm.
And that's the beauty of Buddhism, the whole idea of the koan. The koan is the riddle that cannot be figured out conceptually.
Mhm.
It
And
just
so
can't.
when
It's
and
you
it's
have to
yes.
exhaust your mind in order to.
Yeah. Was it because of your brother that you became interested in different types of spirituality? Or also, how has that come into play with your art?
Well, as a child, again, my mother was quite a remarkable being. She really raised us on comparative religions, and the neighborhood children would come to our home before school, and my mother would serve tea. And every morning she would read from a different sacred text. And she'd say, well, this week we're going to be studying Buddhism. And then the next week, oh, this week we're going to be exploring African mythology. And it was all the same. There was never a preference. This week we're going to be studying about Christianity. And she let it be this very exciting way of looking. And she said, maybe one day a particular path will call to you very uniquely, and maybe not. Maybe your whole life you will just celebrate all the beautiful, diverse ways of worshiping.
Mm-hmm.
So that's how I was raised. And it's such a beautiful way. It's just seeing the essence within each tradition.
Uh-huh. And
Yeah.
so, do you consider yourself to be Buddhist or to be no? So, but you've taken the some of the significant ideas that were meaningful to you.
Yes, I took the precepts, and I was ordained by Thich Nhat Hanh. It was valuable for a time. And now, for example, I don't sit on a zafu to meditate. For me, my entire day is pure meditation.
Mm-hmm.
It's just how conscious am I? And that's what I'm sharing with the people who come to this land. It's not about what we're doing. Some of the young people say, oh, well, I don't want to pull weeds. I want to be doing something more important. And I say, hey, wait a minute. I've been pulling weeds for 50 years. I have a PhD in pulling weeds.
Mm-hmm.
It's not what we're doing, it's how we're doing it, the awareness with which we are doing anything. And that's really such beauty. And one of the Sevadars is who she was here for the last 6 weeks. She just left today, and she wrote the most beautiful letter, just thanking me for being able to be in such a place where
Mm-hmm.
every day we do seva every day in the gardens for 4 to 5 hours. And it's
What
in
is what does that
seva
mean?
is just selfless service, karma yoga,
Uh-huh.
um, tending the land, loving the land, beautifying the sanctuary,
Yeah.
whatever needs to be done, trimming the paths, fixing the goat fence that's broken, whatever. And it's just, and we all share it, and in silence pretty much, which is beautiful.
What was it like to sit with Thich Nhat Hanh?
It was very ordinary. People come to me and say, oh, you got to sit with the great master. Yes, he was a great master, but for me at the time, he was simply my beloved teacher. And I feel very blessed to have met him before the hordes of people started coming. I remember the first winter, there were maybe 15 of us there at Plum Village, just huddled around the wood stoves and sharing meals together and being in the garden. And he would come and join us. And it was just so simple.
Mm-hmm.
And then every year, more and more people came. And then I was invited to sing at his retreats and his Dharma talks. And then the crowds were enormous. Thousands of people would come to his talks. And suddenly he became this famous teacher. And really, for me, it was around that time that I sort of stepped out of the Sangha. I wasn't interested so much in his fame, or
Mm-hmm.
I
I
had a
imagine it
very,
felt like things changed in a way. Even, I mean, it seems like it'd be unavoidable when
yeah,
that many people are interested in being near him.
yes. But his teaching lives on. I mean, I feel him so present in my life, wherever I am. Yeah, he lives very much inside of me.
How did his teachings affect how you feel about music and art?
I think it just confirmed what I felt. Because I remember when I asked his permission. I was taking note. He would say to us, please don't take notes. It's important. Put your pens away. And I shared this in the last interview. I was so struck. Every now and then he would just have these one-liners that were so beautiful. I thought, oh my gosh, I've got to write it down. So I hid a pen in my socks and I
Uh,
would pull out the pen and
wrote
write it
down.
down. In California, I started designing the first series of collages with his quotes. And then I took them to Plum Village the next spring to show him and to ask permission. And he loved them. He was so touched. He said, "Ah, these are so beautiful, Rashani."
Mm.
And he was
Um,
he said, "These are the colors of Vietnam. How did you know?" And I said, "Well, I didn't know. I didn't consciously know."
mhm.
So I think I always connected with him there as an artist and as a poet. And after every Dharma talk, I just felt so inspired. I would go walking and just start writing poetry and writing songs. The songs just came through me. It was pretty remarkable. And I recorded 7 albums of songs and poems, just inspired by my time with him. Thai, which the name that most of us called him, Thai, means teacher in Vietnamese,
Mm.
was so humble and so not interested in fame, or that his humility was what touched me the most,
Mhm.
inspired me. And I remember he was invited to some big spiritual gathering, and these very well-known people were there, and they had their costumes on, and expensive this and that. And then he just walked in his little brown robe and his clogs, and somehow he just derobed everybody.
Mhm.
His presence, his simplicity. Yeah, he had that power. Which was very different than the concept of power that we think of in the Western Northern Hemispherian world. His power
Mhm.
was so invisible and humble.
Mhm.
Yeah. He wasn't trying to be anybody.
Hmm. Who are some other people that just really
That
important?
stopped me in my tracks.
Yeah.
When I was 17, we were living in England, and we discovered that Krishnamurti lived about an hour away.
Uh-huh.
And so we went every Sunday to Brockwood Park, which was his home. And
Mhm.
I was just enthralled. And I still am. This presence that was so empty and so humble. He was chosen as the world messiah in the early 20s, I believe, by the Theosophical Society. And
Okay.
so they brought him from India, they sent him to Oxford University. He was very well educated. And then he became the great leader. And his famous speech, which was given in 1929, there were thousands of people present. He got up one day and he said, "I'm so sorry, but truth is a pathless land, and it cannot be contained by any organization. So I can no longer be part of this organization," basically. And so the whole thing dissolved. And that was his deepest teaching. He just cuts to the chase.
Uh,
He's remarkable. So yeah, he was very, and continues to be very important. And then, just as I close my eyes, I'll tell you who I see. Toni Packer, another remarkable um, teacher. She was ordained as a Buddhist Roshi, and she basically stepped down and she said, "I don't need to shave my head. I don't need to wear robes. It's not about this kind of glamour. I'm mostly interested in just inquiry." And she had been very influenced by Krishnamurti as well. So
mhm.
Tony was a great mentor. Joanna Macy, who I met in the early 80s, she is just a remarkable friend and mentor.
Mhm.
Sort of took me under her wing after my parents died. And so I studied with her for quite a while. And then she really opened me into deep ecology and introduced me to John Seed, who I ended up teaching with in Australia and New Zealand. And that
Mhm.
my journey there just opened me to the Aboriginal teachings in Australia and the Maori people in Aotearoa, New Zealand.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Joan Halifax was also very important in the early 80s for me. And then when I went to India, I went 3 months after my mother died. I was not looking for a teacher.
Mm-hmm.
I was hoping to meet Ma Anandamayi, who had been very influential for me since the 70s.
Mm-hmm.
She died 2 weeks after I arrived in India.
Mm-hmm.
So I was basically just taking my son to Dharamsala to experience the loss of my mother.
Mm-hmm.
And we ended up in the home of an amazing Rinpoche who had just spent 8 years in a cave. And he insisted that we come to his home for private teachings. And I tried to say, no, 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 I'm not looking for a teacher. And my son, who was 7, he bowed and he said, yes, we will see you this evening. So it seemed just sort of unintentional. It was not something that I was looking for. And during that same visit in Dharamsala, I ended up taking refuge with Ling Rinpoche, who was the teacher of His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I had no idea who he was.
Mm-hmm.
I ended up in the home of the Dalai Lama taking refuge. And again, I don't believe in accidents. I mean, obviously, it was somehow choreographed into being, but it was not my intention.
Mm-hmm. What is between of all these people? Do you see there being some sort of through line?
I think the main thread is being pushed back into myself. These are not teachers who enable others. Some of them are very fierce, actually, fierce, compassionate teachers, like Pema Chodron, also another remarkable. Fierce compassion. Well, Pema talked about compassion and then idiot compassion. And by idiot compassion, I think we see it a lot in the new age of people just being nice and sweet and loving, when in actual fact, if they were willing to be truthful and honest, there would be a fierceness that would come through.
Mm.
And I'm not afraid of risking my likability. I learned that many
Uh-huh.
years ago. I
So,
would
so,
rather be authentically angry than inauthentically sweet.
mm-hmm.
And I think, oh, and Byron Katie, there's another huge. I met her in 1999, and my life was turned inside out
Mm-hmm.
after spending 2 weeks with her.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so she, another one who just a hunger for the truth. Either we have that or we don't.
Mm-hmm. So you learned to be authentic or truthful regardless of what the consequences could be.
Yes, yes. And then I have to say, coming to Hawaii after my mother and father had died, I was very ill. I had been given a year to live. I had advanced Lyme disease,
Mm.
and I was told that if I didn't do intravenous antibiotics for 12 months, my body probably wouldn't survive.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, well, I don't want to do antibiotics, so I'd like to go to Hawaii and have a great year.
Mm-hmm.
That was 30 years ago. And the land where I was staying, and which became my first sanctuary, had an amazing lava tube. It was a ceremonial cave. And I spent hours and hours in that dark cave the first year in Hawaii. And I don't hear voices, but I felt the ancestors saying to me, this was 1991, leave everything you know behind. Leave everything you think you know behind. Leave it behind. We're not interested. And that
Mm-hmm.
was so humbling. It was like being gutted out.
What brought you to this cave? What was it about it?
It was like entering the womb of the earth. Just literally going into the mother. And it's created actually from Mauna Loa volcano. So it's a lava tube that's connected to the volcano. So it's like the umbilical cord to the
Mm.
mother of mothers, which is Pele, the great goddess that is still worshipped on this island.
Mm.
And she, like Kali, Kali is considered the goddess of dismemberment. But the beauty is she will only dismember that which is not true.
Mm-hmm.
So once that is dismembered, we can remember who we truly are. So
Hmm.
that dismemberment process is so profound. And Pele is the same. So many people come to this island and their lives are sort of ripped apart. They think they're coming for a nice vacation, but everything is pulled out from under them.
Do you feel like there's a point everything you've learned you then forget it? Do you have any sort of approach like that?
I don't think it's an approach. I think it just naturally happens.
Uh-huh.
And I think so much is an unlearning, really. There's so much to unlearn.
Mm.
Just what we've been programmed to believe from a young age. And so
Mm-hmm.
this unlearning takes place. And then as that brings us just to the simplicity of the moment. I don't
So
believe in, I don't, learning is about acquiring more information. And I don't think anybody needs any more information. We
mhm.
have plenty of information. And learning, I think, in the brain, it actually, something happens when we learn, something moves. But when we discover, it's an instant, direct experience. There's no movement apparently in the brain. Like
Mhm.
learning is an acquisition, whereas discovery is an instant knowing. Do you know what I mean?
I think so. I think, to me, I think of it like experiencing versus reading, sort of, or like.
Yes. And really, it's only a direct experience
Hmm.
that can ever awaken one. Nothing else. Everything else is secondhand information, really.
And so you said you've been making visual art using Photoshop. Do you often bring together the different mediums? It sounds like I know that you've taken some of the writing with the visual art. How did you incorporate the recordings as well?
I haven't really incorporated those, and my recordings were from 1986 to the mid 90s, pretty
Hmm.
much. I recorded 15 albums total.
And I had read that you had some of the recordings were of different um, from different cultures. You had learned songs. What was what was that process like?
Well, I was a song gatherer.
Uh-huh.
I traveled extensively, and wherever I went, I just wanted to learn the songs of the people. I lived in a Bulgarian community in the south of France. Have you ever heard of Mikhail Omram Ivanov? He was a Bulgarian mystic who lived in
Mm.
France. Just this remarkable community. And every day we would walk up this mountain and just watch the sunrise. He was a sun worshiper.
Mm.
There were people from Zen traditions who would be sitting in lotus positions. There would be people from Hindu traditions, Muslim traditions, Christian, and none of that mattered. What mattered was we were watching the sunrise, which was so beautiful. And then for lunch and dinner, we would enter this huge, huge dining hall. There were hundreds of people,
Mm.
and these songbooks would be passed out, and we would break into song. We learned singing in the mornings. We would sing in four-part harmony, these
Mm.
Bulgarian songs, and then the songbooks would be passed back, and then everybody would eat in silence.
Mm.
It's just so exquisite. So the communities that drew me, like Teze also, they sing the liturgy 3 or 4 times a day at Teze. And La Communauté de l'Arche, another incredible community started by Lanza del Vasto, who spent a year with Mahatma Gandhi. Every day there were folk songs being shared. We would go for picnics, people would put down the picnic basket and just break into song.
Mm-hmm.
I
And you
think
didn't
that
have a recorder at this point, did you?
no, not yet.
Uh-huh.
My first album, I lived in the south of France for 18 years. And on market days, I would go to Cahors. And in Cahors, there's a 12th century Byzantine cathedral,
Mm-hmm.
two incredible domes. It has acoustics like the Taj Mahal,
Mm-hmm.
where I also sang in 1991. And so every market day, I would go into the cathedral and just sing because the acoustics were so amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And then I discovered that many of the Christian cathedrals are built literally on top of the ancient goddess worshiping sites.
Hmm.
And one day I just had this message, bring the goddess back. So I contacted two amazing musicians, Molly Scott and Sarah Benson. They were in Massachusetts. And I said, would you be interested in coming to France for 2 weeks to record an album with me?
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, long story short, we spent 2 weeks. We got permission from the priests to sing in these remarkable cathedrals. We were given the keys to these cathedrals
Hmm.
because when the priests said, well, what kind of music are you singing? And I knew if I had told them it was pre-Christian, pagan goddess, they would say no. But I said, oh, Father, it's all sacred music. And they'd say, oh, wonderful, wonderful. So we did these remarkable recordings. So that was my first album called We All Come from the Goddess.
Mm-hmm.
And that came out in 1986. And back in those days, there was Lady Slipper was a women's music distribution company. And that album sold thousands of copies. It was
Nice.
a cassette back in
Uh-huh.
the
Yeah. And so you would gather these songs and then record them? Was that the how you
yeah,
approached it?
yeah.
And did you at some point get a recorder so you could, bring that in and record the
Yes,
songs?
I bought a very expensive recorder because I heard of the Blue Room on the island of Kauai where the kahunas used to chant.
Mm.
But you have to swim underwater and then you come up in a small chamber and then you swim underwater again and you come up in the Blue Room.
Huh.
So I took my sound equipment, I wrapped it probably in 20 layers of plastic to record in the Blue Room. Um, but most of the time, or rather, and most of the time, I was guided to amazing sound engineers. Like in Australia, I remember after teaching, a friend of mine said, oh, I just heard there's a man renting his sound studio for $25 an hour. And I said, oh, what's the catch? Usually it was $80 an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And my friend said, oh, he misses his partner. She lives in LA and he wants to send her a ticket. So I called him and I said, I'd like to book your studio for, I don't know, a week or 10 days. And my friend said, you don't have any songs ready yet. And I said, I will.
Uh-huh.
I will by Monday. So I was visiting with an Aboriginal teacher and I asked her, Lorraine Moffey Williams, I said, do you know any musicians that could help me set some poetry to music? And she said, yes, go down the street, turn left at the eucalyptus tree, go to the third house on the right, and you'll meet Koshal. He plays didgeridoo, he plays keyboard, he plays guitar, he plays anything you want.
Mm-hmm.
So as I approached this home, I could hear arguing, I could hear conflict. I knocked on the door and this woman opened the door. She had tears in her eyes, and behind her was a man packing a suitcase. And I thought, this is interesting. And she said, what are you doing here? And I said, what am I doing in Australia or what am I doing on your doorstep? And she said, both. And I said, well, I've just spent 8 weeks offering groups that I call, and I just made up, I forget what it, in the moment, because I could tell they were in a huge conflict. I said, I'm offering groups called The Beauty of Conflict, the hidden message of conflict. And she said, really? And I said, yes. And so she says, Koshal, come, there's some woman here. But really, I was there to meet him because he was a musician. Anyway, long story short, she invites me in. I sit with them for 2 hours and they move through this hatred and projection. They fall back into love. He unpacks his bag and then he says to me, oh, by the way, sister, why are you here? And I
Mm.
said, I'm looking for a musician. I've written poetry in the last 8 weeks. I'd love some help putting it to music. And he said, oh, I'd love to. So he came, we started that day, and he just set my poems to music.
Uh-huh.
And we went into the sound studio. It was so magic. And then local people showed up when they heard that I was there. An amazing guitarist, another didgeridoo player, another flautist. There always seemed to be like a magic that occurred
Hmm.
whenever I was recording. Just amazing.
And
Something
so,
something bigger than myself
uh,
was happening.
you had said, you booked this space to record, and that's an investment right there,
Yeah.
and without having the songs yet, without having a musician, is that always been the way that you've approached things, or
That was unique. That was unique. I did another album with Jim Barinholtz. Do you know Jim Barinholtz?
I don't.
Oh, he's remarkable. He's just remarkable.
What's he do?
He plays over 100 instruments. You'd love to
Okay.
interview him. He's
Yeah,
phenomenal. He and I used to do ceremony together.
I'll look him up.
And I was just so inspired. I did an album with him called Cycles and Spirals. So to
Uh-huh.
answer your question, many of my albums had themes.
Mm.
So for Cycles and Spirals, it's a whole album with songs with the theme of cycles and spirals. And he and I had been planning these songs for weeks and weeks. And I remember we needed two more songs. So literally on the way that I was driving on the way to the sound studio, and I was writing two more songs on the way.
Mhm.
But usually I would have the songs prepared because they came as themes to me. And I did
Mhm.
a beautiful album called Death is a Gateway.
Mm.
It's a collection of songs I sang to my father the last night of his life.
Mm.
Beautiful, beautiful songs.
Mhm. So did you? I think I was reading in the early '70s. You were with your son. He was 4. I'm just wondering, like, I know for myself, as someone who has not followed a standard path. It's not always easy. What were some of the I don't know if obstacles are the right word, but what were some of the things that you had to deal with to get to a place of, I guess, peace, or um, to you wouldn't be where you are now without your past. I don't know if you see it that way or not, but I'm just curious, like, what were some of those experiences like, and how did you deal with them?
The obstacles?
Yeah.
Hmm.
Or did you look at them
I
like
don't,
obstacles?
I don't know that I looked at anything as an obstacle. Everything was an opportunity.
Mm-hmm. So
When
like.
I to Denmark, my son was 3, and I was I was researching feminist communities back then. I was just very interested in the whole feminist movement, and I discovered that there was a A.S. Neil International Kindergarten in this little town called Hellerup outside of Copenhagen.
Mm.
And I called and asked if my son could come, and they said, "Oh no, we have a wait list of a year." And I begged the head of the school. I said, "Please, would you just let my son come, and could you interview me?" Anyway, my son got in to that
Mm.
school, and I remember I bicycled him to school every day. We bicycled half an hour. I dropped him off, bicycled back. He went to school in 5 countries. So maybe from his perspective, there were obstacles.
Mm.
From mine, I don't recall
I
obstacles.
mean, were there times where you were like, I want to be doing this, but I'm not there yet, that sort of thing? I guess that's what I'm referring to.
No, and I've talked to other single mothers who said, "Oh, I wish I could be doing this." And I just knew when my son was very young, I had his astrology chart read, and I said to the astrologer, "What is the greatest gift I can bring this human being who's come to me as my child?"
Mm.
And the astrologer said, "Well, he has 5 planets in Sagittarius. He's a traveler." He needs to travel, show him the world.
Mm.
So I thought, okay, I will.
And
And
it
by the
sounds like
time
you,
by the
what's
time
that?
he was 10, he'd been to, I don't know, 12 different countries and been to school in 5 different countries. So I think I wanted always to be of service to him
Mm-hmm.
and also to be nourishing what felt right for me. And
Yeah.
so they always met. There was never, I didn't feel a struggle.
Yeah. No, I can relate to, you know, I have a 5-year-old son, and and so I also I can relate to the, you know, you want to give the best of what you can give to them, and to do that you need to live your best life. And so it sounds like you stayed true to that while also giving him these experiences.
Yes. And, you know, I was raised by classic artists. I wasn't allowed coloring books as a child. So of course, when my son was born, there was no way I was going to give him Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck
Uh-huh.
coloring book. And when he was 2, I went walking with him every morning in this our little village in France, and I was drawing the wild edible plants and um, medicinal herbs.
Mm-hmm.
I came home one day, and I'm quite a perfectionist, so I ripped a few out of my journal and threw them in the garbage can. And then I went in the other room to make lunch for him, and it was unusually quiet in the living room, so I peeked around the corner, and he had pulled out my drawings from the garbage can,
Hmm.
and he was coloring so meticulously. So I made 2 coloring books for him when he was 2 years old. These
Oh, nice.
beautiful, beautiful coloring books. So I always felt like he was my teacher from the youngest age.
Mm-hmm.
And he really still is. He's now 47 years old. It's still
Okay.
my greatest teacher.
Yep. So I just turned 48, so we're basically the same age. Where is he now?
He lives in France in the village where I raised him.
Oh, did he go back there, or did he stay
He
there?
went to university in Canada, so I wrongly assumed that he would want to move to Canada. He had so many friends and he loved it there.
Mm,
And after my father died, both my parents were gone, and I went back to France. And I never thought I would leave. I had bought this beautiful, beautiful 17th century stone farmhouse, which I renovated for 18 years. It's absolutely magnificent.
mm,
But suddenly it was just empty. It was finished. I didn't make a decision. I just woke up one day and I knew it was complete. So I called my son in Vancouver. I said, "Sweetheart, I'd like you to come and make peace with your past. I'm going to sell the farmhouse." So he
mm,
he came back, and I think I was in California at the time, and he called me and said, "You can't sell this. This is my home."
mm,
So long story short, he still lives there, and I haven't seen him for 3 years.
mm.
Um,
COVID
that's
probably didn't help
challenging.
with it. What's it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll bet. Um, so he's, as you said, this is in the south of France.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's about an hour away from Plum Village by
Oh,
motorbike.
okay.
Yeah.
And does he have any sort of spiritual practice, or did you influence him in that way at all?
No, I think he needed to rebel.
Uh-huh.
He's a remarkable artisan. I think
Uh-huh.
that, if anything, would be his practice. He's a remarkable builder. He's renovated the home that I renovated. He's re-renovated it, and he
Uh-huh.
has reputation in that whole area for being just a very high quality stonemason and carpenter. And so for him, it's art in a very functional way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for me too, I wanted to say, my collages are just one form. I would say the greatest collage I've ever done is this sanctuary. I call it my 3-dimensional edible collage.
Mm-hmm.
And when people come to help me in the garden, I say, it's a collage. Notice how this ground cover is just coming up to the rock wall, and then the texture changes, and then there's a gravel path, and then there's another texture over here. It's all a collage. So
Mm-hmm.
people start seeing it as this 3-dimensional collage of colors and shapes and textures. and sounds, multi-dimensional.
Yeah, I was thinking that well, I mean, even just seeing your backdrop of your room where you are, and no, it sounds very lovely, and what everything I saw online sounds like a beautiful place. Well, I really appreciate you taking the time to talk with me, and I'm sorry about the start with the sound.
Quite all right. We got to really just go slowly, breathe, and smile.
Yes,
I,
exactly. Some
they
some
take I
some
want to say
nonverbal.
one thing. If you have a 5-year-old son, when my
Yeah.
son was 7, he illustrated one of my poems, which I'll send to you.
Okay.
Beautiful book. I'll send you the PDF. So I highly recommend that you co-create with him.
Absolutely. It's something we when he was younger, I spent a good bit of time with him, and we would do some music together, and but we've kind of gotten away from that, and I think I'd like to get back to that with him, some sort of creation, and really involving him in some sort of process of creating. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. Do you have any last question or?
Well, let's see. Well, yeah, I guess the writing the books. I mean, I you strike me as someone who's just constantly creating and output. But it sounds like but you do have to take that time also. So do you just listen to yourself as far as taking your own
Yes. In
time?
fact, after Go Slowly, Breathe, and Smile, I really was in recovery for.
You said 3 months, like no.
Yeah.
So yeah.
And I said to my friends, this is the last book. I'm not doing any more. And then lo and behold, it was about just over a month ago, I felt just seized by the muse.
New idea.
And I was not a plan. It was not anything I had thought about. I've just completed another amazing book. I spent over 200 hours
Mhm.
staring at this screen. It's a beautiful book. It's called Taste the Sky.
Oh, I love that title.
And the subtitle is Love Made Visible Through Art and Poetry.
Uh-huh. So that just leads me to one another question. So 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 what are your thoughts on discipline, making yourself do something? You
I
know,
never make myself do anything.
no. So you're just
Oh, no, as a child, my father he said freedom is discipline.
uh-huh.
So I was raised with tremendous discipline.
Well, so
And
that's an interesting statement. Freedom is discipline. In music, I've heard, and I don't remember exactly who said it. One of the great jazz masters said basically something to the extent of to play freely takes. I'm paraphrasing. Takes discipline. Takes a lot of discipline.
yes, but like you were saying a while ago, then we forget it.
Uh huh.
But discipline is somehow suffused in our being.
But
And
how do you continue to put things out without that discipline? I mean, it seems like there has to be some discipline there to do that.
I guess it is tremendous. Like just sit, like I'm in the garden 4 to 5 hours a day, then I take a lunch break. And then when I am seized by the muse, I'm at this laptop for hours at a time. So
So
that
you're
could be
ready.
called, yeah, that could be called discipline, but I see it as what I wrote about in Go Slowly, Breathe, and Smile. It's a self-emptying process.
Uh huh.
The sense of Rashani is gone, it vanishes. And there's just creativity
So it's pouring
unstoppable.
out.
That's pouring through. And do you experience that in your music? I mean,
Uh,
just
I experience it in different ways. I experience it with visual art, and you know, I'm trying to think if I've experienced it. I'm still figuring out for myself how music and art are the same. It's because they were very separate for a long time for me. I think starting to be more interested in video as well has helped me become more have more awareness of how disciplines that could seem so different also are related.
wonderful, wonderful.
Yeah. Well, thank you once again.
Oh, you're so welcome.